Good evening and welcome to the first episode of Heathen Conversations. My name is Lauren Crow. I'm the communications director for the Troth, and tonight we are going to have a great time on our very first episode. All right, guys, joining me tonight is the steer of the Troth. This is Rob Schreier. Rob, thank you so much for being here with us tonight on our very first episode. Couldn't think of anybody better to talk to tonight.
And Lauren, thank you so much, and thank you for your flexibility considering the little clinical trials burp that I had when this was originally scheduled for. But
hell, this after the past 2 years with the pandemic, I think we've all had to learn to be very flexible.
Yeah, flexible or die, right? Now it was, but I appreciate that. I appreciate everybody for joining us tonight. It's I'm kind of looking forward to this now.
I'm really looking forward to this. This is going to be a great time. So if you are in the chat right now and you are watching and you are a Troth member, drop a 1 in the chat right now so we can see how many Troth members we have with us. So, Rob, I kind of wanted to get you on because it's being members of the Read, we often are seen as by our positions.
Yes.
But what I really want to know is more your story. Because a lot of people don't know our stories, right?
This is actually true because I was thinking about this earlier today, Lauren. I was like, for as much as I've known, as long as I've known Ben and you, and I really don't actually even know that much about like your stories. And so I think that when you guys, like, at some point somebody needs to be interviewing you on this.
Yeah.
Unless you want to have like the Lauren monologues or something, but because it is interesting because so many of us come from so many different backgrounds. Many of us may have started out Christian, but some of us started out Jewish. Some of us started out growing up with no particular religion, and nobody really necessarily understands where everybody else is coming from. And it does actually play a role. I'm going to tell you right now, my cats are creeping all around me. So at some point, don't be surprised if a cat throws up behind me or something. It's
added amusement.
Yes, it's just de rigueur for my house. But anyway, so let's see. What was the question? I'm sorry.
And that's the thing. Like in fact, my roommate at boarding school was raised Wiccan, like from birth. So her dad was the first person I ever heard of that was Ossetry was her dad, back in 1995.
Wow.
So, yeah. So we have we're really lucky in the sense that we have a really wide level of experience. You'll probably see a dog too, because mine are flying around here. So we have a really wide experience of heathens from all backgrounds. So you probably have one of the most unique though, because you were raised Mennonite.
I was raised Christian with Mennonite. I spent many decades in the Mennonite church, and with the I still wear the identity as cultural identities, and a lot of this has come into, which will come up in the discussion later on. There are more than a few people in the in Orglava who adopt our traditional clothing styles, whether plain or fancy, as part of their religious identity, and we can touch upon that later on. But having spent most of my life with one foot in the plain sectarian or Mennonite background, the other in the fancy Pennsylvania Dutch culture, with my mother having a lot of Lutheran influence in her family, it's because otherwise everybody gets a little. Otherwise, your family tree becomes a wreath, and so you really can't have that happen. So you have to marry out. But
yeah,
which does help, by the way. But so I'm informed by both segments of the Pennsylvania Dutch population, both like the plain and the non-plain sectarian group, and that's where it all begins. But really, most of the driving force behind Orglava comes out of what they call the fancy Dutch, or the people who generally, if they were Christian, identified as Lutheran, Reformed, or from the big churches. And some cat is meowing somewhere. So that's what began. So I grew up in the culture traditionally. I speak the language, and I know a lot about the history and the folklore, and that's where it got its beginning. And I knew aspects of pre-Christian tradition, even before it was cool to know aspects of pre-Christian tradition. But it didn't actually really begin to strike me really, really, really hard over the head until I couldn't avoid listening to it anymore in 2007. Prior to that, I was already hearing it, but I just wasn't making sense of it. And that's the story begins with me coming in with the knowledge of Brockwright and Hexerite, and knowledge of knowing that there were things, and helpful entities and all these cultural aspects, but not being able to piece them all together in the larger Heathen context until then. So stage setting, born in 1965. By 2007, I was already thinking like there's something not right here.
So what was your first? Because this is always an interesting question I like to ask. The first time you really ran into or interacted with heathenry.
See, with heathenry directly as like an entity, because there were things I look back in retrospect now and I see that they were actually markers or influences or like nudges or something like that I did not identify at the time. And but in 2007, it was like specifically September, I knew by this point that I was hearing the call of multiple deities and that I wasn't crazy for that reason. All right. Yeah. Other reasons maybe, but not that one. And I could not figure it all out. And so I was on vacation in Naples, Florida. My parents had a house down there. That's gonna be up for sale if anybody wants to buy it. But and I decided I was gonna to begin to look into this a little bit. And so I went out and I went to a store. I probably have this book here somewhere, but some rough equivalent to like Hinduism for Dummies books, where because the only religion I knew off the top of my head that was polytheistic, and active was Hinduism. And so I picked up the book and I was reading it, and inside the book was the book was written by a Norwegian author of Norwegian descent, and in it she mentions Asatru for the first time that I've ever seen it. Like, okay, so let me check that out. And so I researched that, and I ordered Diana Paxton's Essential Asatru online. And when I got the book, I started reading it. As I'm reading, I was like, all of a sudden, it's like, whoa, okay, I'm seeing all these things. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's our donor. Wait, that's our, and like, oh my gosh, those helpful entities in Brockwright that people call to help with this and that and the other thing. They're the old gods, the old goddesses. And of course, in retrospect, I look back like, how could I not have figured that out? I mean, I guess it's just because it was so endemic to the culture. It was so built in that it wasn't even necessarily being off that they were gods. Like, it was like they were just there. And then my initial thought was, well, we have a whole section of this lore ourselves. And I was trying to figure out how could I possibly, bring our folklore into the mix with the folklore of the other regions. But while they are very similar, and in many ways they're a lot alike, they're just different enough that, interjecting our context in with somebody else's might actually damage the actual lore that came down. So we stand side by side. We're all heathens. We all, can get along. Our rituals are all very similar and everything, but we do have differences. And it's not necessarily one is right or one is wrong, because the gods call to people in different ways that reach them where they are, what their background is, what their environment is, and all that stuff deserves to be celebrated and observed as we go forward through time. And that right there was one of the most amazing realizations ever. And since then, Orwell was just kept growing and growing and growing, and our research keeps going and going, because there's all these things in our folklore that are preserved in different areas of the Pennsylvania Dutch diaspora that just really actually surprise us sometimes. So.
Yeah, I'm running into so I belong to a kind of a cousin culture, the Ozark, which is a derivative of Appalachian,
Yes.
which is kind of a cousin culture, and I have seen very similar things in my research in Ozark folklore, where not so much the gods, but the very the whites and a lot of those kind of lower beings, not in a, but show up very much, and it very much carries across those cultures. And I think that that's important. Is, I've often said there's a lot of ways to do heathenry right. There's also a lot of ways to do it wrong, but there's no one way to do it right.
And I think that's probably also, it's kind of like, how when you begin to think of the multiverse, your mind begins to explode about just like how many different possibilities there are, and how nobody has the right answer, but not anybody necessarily has all the wrong answers either. The same thing applies to heathenry, how the same deities can call to different people in such different contexts, and everybody still actually be right. The whole one-way argument is how we get into heresies and persecutions and burnings at the stake and things like that. And thankfully, we're not like that.
So you were able to draw those parallels in there, but I have to. What was your first kind of encounter with other heathens?
My first encounter with other heathens, right? Actually, this happened in September of 2007, and by November 2007, I had already been found by the woman who ran her name is Patricia Niedrich, and she lives in Chicago. She's going to be moving to Pennsylvania sometime later this year. But she saw me posting somewhere. This is back when I was a newbie heathen. We all know that when you're a new heathen, you grasp for whatever you can find, right?
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, one of the first things I found was the Rinnenschaft. And now this is back before they went way beyond the tipping point. But
this was back when most groups were still trying to be big tent groups because we felt we were such a small community.
And she saw me posting something about Pennsylvania Dutch things in there, and she had only recently discovered that she had been adopted, and that her father's family was a Pennsylvania Dutch background. And she invited me to go and join the Hexenkunst Yahoo group. And so I went on there, and that's where my Brockerai mentor, I met her through there. And she knew she and I actually knew a lot of people in the same circles. But that's where the term Orglova was actually established. And by that point, I already created the first meetup group. And the meetup groups, sometimes when you start these heathen meetup groups, you find yourself sitting alone in a restaurant or a bar or something like that, waiting for the first person to come and join you. And well, let's see. Do I want to say this? Sure, I'll say it. The very first person who attended ended up being one of the highest ranking people in the AFA while I was still of the Troth. In other words, that little schism between the two runs right through Pennsylvania, roughly along the Pennsylvania Turnpike, about 30 miles west of me. And it's interesting how much of it plays itself out here, but yet it's not so surprising because this part of the country has a fairly large, concentrated number of heathens in the Philadelphia metro area and New Jersey and down in Maryland. And but that was the first person I met, and for a while we were all trying to get along, but then the schism came up really quickly. It really just drove, I think back at it now, drove home the schism was right there from the very beginning, and we weren't even conscious of it, but it appeared. But now the second person and the third person I met were actually people who are very active in our heathenry today. My friend Brian Weiss and Deborah Wheeler, who helped me found Distal Think Sip Shop. So and since then we've been growing. So that was 2000. I think it was maybe early in 2008 that we did that. Then we did our first ritual in a place that we rented from somebody who was a metaphysical healing place. And they were trying to be like hobbits, where they were doing a grass roof on their house and everything. They were actually kind of cool. The wife of they were non-binary, so I don't exactly know what terms. I know she used she. I'm not sure what her counterpart used, but she used she. She was actually Sami, and so she had some interesting stories to be able to tell because she was right out of Finland, But my first experience with Heathens was in our local little community. There was Troth 2009 where I first met people, like people who had long been established as Heathens, and said person would actually be Patty LaFay, who signed me in at Troth 2009. And when I signed in, I used my name Robert Lusch, and she didn't really seem to know me. And she was asking me a couple of questions. And I thought about it. I was like, you know what? You maybe know me as Robert L. Schreiber. And she's like, yeah, I know who you are. I'm like, oh, that's not actually my name. That's actually my title. Oh, really? And because the way it appeared on my old email was Rob L. Schreiber. It was Rob Lusch, the writer. And but it became my pen name, became my author name, became my identity, and so I held on to it, and I kind of appreciate it.
Yeah, and Ben commented, sitting alone in a restaurant or bar. Been there, done that, right? And that he and I both have done that a lot. There have been plenty of meetups here in, for those of you who don't know, Ben is my kindred brother. We founded our kindred together 19 years ago almost. And Ben and I, there have been plenty of meetups where it's just been me and Ben, or me and Ben and his wife. So yeah. And that, I got lucky that was the first heathen I ever met. Like, other than, when I started looking into heathenry, Ben was the first heathen I ever met.
And talk about nod to Ben. I mean, Ben has contributed so much in so many ways that they're innumerable, not just to the Troth, but also to Heathenry. And Lauren, I got to tell you, you're right behind him with that. I mean, the two of you together make a formidable team, and it's. I don't think that you sometimes get quite the recognition you're due for that because you're too busy making it happen. So
I am the. Some people have spiritual gifts. Some people talk to the gods. I am the logician. Like, I just get things together.
Yes, and it's and that's why one thing I enjoy about that is the fact that we have a read of people who do not necessarily agree on everything, but we can talk to each other. Yes, we mean Patricia LaFay, the author.
Yes.
Patty LaFay. The V is silent, from what I understand.
And also currently the High Steward for the Troth, and was instrumental in helping us revamp that program, which has been running wonderfully since then. And just really appreciate all the work that Patty's done.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is one thing. One thing about the Troth is that we all have a tendency to wear too many hats. I got the reason sitting right over there right now, and we need to sometimes, it was good to have Patty come back into a role that she was already familiar with, but rebuild it in her vision. And I think that really has helped.
Mary Antonelli, who is our corporate treasurer, our reckoner, likes to call it helium hand syndrome.
Yeah. Yes, and Mary herself has that too. Hi, Mary.
Yes, we have that problem, and but hey, if you would like to volunteer, we got lots of positions. If you're in the Troth, you know how to find me. So with that, that kind of does bring up an interesting point. How did you end up in the Troth?
Okay, well, same way everybody else did back in that day. Internet search. Yeah. Okay. Heathen groups, whatever, Ossetru, and
because back then it was Ossetru. Let's call it what it was. It was all Ossetru back then.
Yes, it was. And I looked that up, and unfortunately, the Troth name did not come up first. It came up second. Guess after who?
Yeah.
And I joined the AFA because that was, I didn't know, and at first it wasn't that bad, but it didn't take long before. By 2009, the rift was already pretty apparent. It was already getting worse, and even within the AFA, I saw a lot of people splitting off because they were getting nervous about the direction that it was going, and I really don't want to talk much more about them because they run their own race, so to speak, in a very odd way. But
this was before they started saying the quiet part out loud.
Yeah, and so. But I actually didn't terminate my membership with them right away because I really wasn't reading their boards. The Troth ones, it was the Troth boards that were interesting because we had people like Ben and like Stefan Grundy and Diana, and we had people who were like sharing real knowledge and like making research suggestions, where to go, where to find this, and where to find that. And I met Diana and Lori Wood at Troth 2009, and we all we hit it off pretty quickly, and so that made a difference. I knew people now, and I grew to trust them. We grew our relationships, blossomed from that point forward. Then, and in 2000, sometime in 2009, actually, it was at that same Troth move. I was actually solicited by the then steer, Victoria, to become the steward of Pennsylvania, and so I took that role on. And then before long, I had New Jersey too, because if I stand on my roof, I can see New Jersey. But yeah, well, why I would want to stand on my roof to see New Jersey, I don't know. But but
Hey, my mom is from New Jersey.
hey, listen, I gotta tell you, some of the best people in the Troth, and some of the best, most active heathens I know, right across the bridge. But we have a lot of really wonderful people from this entire region, and I'm very happy with the way most of Heathenry has grown in this region. So I ended up becoming the steward of Pennsylvania, and then I think that probably the next major event was I was elected to the Reed, and then InReach came along. I was elected to the Reed in 2011, and but early in 2000, actually no, the InReach came first. Early in 2011, I received a letter from an inmate in a New Jersey State prison who had sent me a note thanking me for my Yule card from the prior year. It was actually almost a year, several months later. So it was actually the 2009 card that he was acknowledging early in 2011. And he said it had taken him this long to write to me because he felt like nervous and a little bit ashamed of why he was in prison and everything. And but one of the things he was said in his letter was, that he's surrounded by all these people who just seem to be so full of hate, and he really just didn't want this. He wanted to learn, but he didn't want to learn from these people, which was actually kind of daring for him to say in a way to somebody he really didn't even know. And so that's when I started InReach. And it started out just as a local thing with here in New Jersey, but now it's expanded outward, and it really needs to grow even more because, as many people in our audience, and you, of course, certainly know, Lauren, virulent racist forms of heathenry are most rapidly growing religion in many prisons throughout the United States, and not just the United States either. That makes it even worse. And so they take something that could be a treasure and a real way for them to find stability and positivity and experience like a soul-satisfying sense of belonging from a community, and turn it into this thing where it's divisive, harmful to people, and somehow pursuing something that's never going to happen, which is some sort of nebulous concept of racial purity. I mean, and add to it homophobia and the misogyny that goes along with it. And you wonder yourself, it's like you're missing the point. You're missing the opportunity. The opportunity is heathenry is this. This is inspired by Brian Weiss a little bit. He's a Troth member. He's also an interfaith minister here in Eastern Pennsylvania. But all religions have some major core features to them. Like, okay, for Christianity, it's about reckoning the sin, the fall of man or whatever. But for heathenry, it's about building connections, to ourselves, building our connections to our environment, to our communities, to our neighbors, and like these levels of frith that go out from the person. And, there are different interpretations of how frith is expressed or how it's assessed. Now, from Orglova, we owe everybody an element of frith just by being human until they give us a reason not to. And unless they give us a reason not to. So why would we want to be in conflict with our neighbors from any background if we don't have to be? Like why try to find reasons to divide each other when interdependence is a way for us all to move forward and to do better? And that topic could go into the weeds very quickly.
Yeah, definitely.
But it is a salient point, and it's extremely important because the concept of racial purity doesn't exist. I mean, like, and if it did, again, we'd be back to the family tree being a wreath thing, and it's just, it's so unnecessary, and yet it benefits a certain set of people who keep it running, and that is something that people need to recognize. They need to follow the power and figure out why this is even happening. So I'm going to go ahead, Lauren.
I just want to plug, but Ben and I actually did a live podcast at Troth, not this past Troth, but the one before, that we recorded, where we talked about the concept of whiteness and the history and the fact that the very concept of whiteness that we kind of talk about now didn't exist until about 150 years ago. And people from Scandinavia weren't even considered white until around 1890-ish, thanks to the World's Fair and anti-Catholic sentiment. But that's kind of my rant there. But I do want to tell you a little story, Rob, because I don't think I've ever shared this story with you. But we have a young man here in Arkansas who was in federal prison in Texas. And he's heathen. And I've met with him a few times. But he was steered away from the Odinist gangs and groups purely by the correspondence and the outreach of the InReach program. And it's a very cool thing to see. Like, this guy has absolutely stepped away from that, and as a result, he came out of prison without any kind of racist, affiliations. And that's an uphill battle, because until we started doing InReach as an organization, before that started, we really the primary drivers of that kind of work were, of course, Elsa Christensen's the one who started doing any kind of heathen or Odinist programming, but then you had the Odinic Rite. So it is an uphill battle, but yeah, I mean, it does make a difference. And I have written before Joe kind of took over doing all the letters. I've written lots of letters. Ended up writing a letter to a guy I went to high school with, which was weird, but it's definitely important. And I think that we, I think that InReach is one of the most important things. And I know something that you and I have talked about is hopefully providing in the future, maybe once you have concluded your term of steer and have time to breathe, actual like InReach training, not too differently than like we do clergy training, like actually training people to go into the prisons, because that's, for me as a woman, that's something I'm hesitant to do because I don't feel like I know what I'm doing.
And Joe Hundig, she was a corrections officer, so she actually has a lot of insight into that, and having taken that part over, it can be taxing going in, because when I've gone into lockdowns, like I've been delayed there for hours, like all sorts of things can happen. But stories like Lauren, you actually literally brought a tear to my eye there for a minute ago. I mean, when I heard that story, it really just made me feel like yes, that's one of those reasons that we're here. And now regarding Elsa Christensen and everything, I'm going to also give a nod to Ethan Stark and Eric Moskenthorpe about the and Brian Weiss again about our presentation at the Parliament of the World's Religions on this topic, and how pervasive Odinism was in the prisons, and how it got its start from this grandmotherly looking woman from Denmark who was like this Nazi. And it's kind of frightening, because you see picture of her, you can't imagine her being this like
when we say Nazi, we're not being like
glib.
She was a
Nazi.
She was a Nazi, a member of the Nazi party in Denmark. And Justin will say, I learned the faith in prison and outspoken against those being racist and using the faith as their crutch. Justin, that's amazing. And that's the kind of stuff I love to hear.
Yes, me too. And it's the problem is when you're on the inside, it's hard to be that bold sometimes, because the Aryan Brotherhood of recruiters, there are all these people around there, and they're watching who's doing what. And they'll undergo smear campaigns against anybody who tries to upset their apple cart, and yes, and Ben, I do remember this. There were voices in the Troth about 15 years ago that argued the Troth should not get involved with prison ministry at all on the grounds that prisoners were, quote, outlaws and therefore unworthy. And one of the arguments that we had against that actually was one of the selling points and purposes for InReach was the fact that these people, their outlaw actions were before they became heathens. When they became heathens, it was they had an opportunity to do the right thing. And if they were not provided with the proper information, they were going to come out and come into our communities and become our problems. Or they could be either our problems or our solutions, or they could be contributors to the community. It all depended on what opportunities they were given. And if we didn't go in, then who was? Who would go?
And a lot of people are in prison, and I know this, I speak this from experience from my own family members. There's a lot of people that are in prison because of, things I personally don't think, addiction, things that should be treated as a health issue and not in prison. Especially the criminal justice system in America is very complicated. And I'm sure we could talk about that for hours, but the important thing here is, we can't ignore, to me, and you and I have a very similar approach on this. We're more nuanced on things, and we can't ignore, we can't just say, oh, well, they're outlaws, we can't do this. We have to look at what is, like you and I were talking about, we have to look at the bigger picture, and we're all intertwined. I'm going to crib back to something that I was in the Wild Hunt. We can't choose to be on our own. It's just something you can't do, because we are all, the web of weird is so intricately twined between all of us that we can't, everything we do affects everyone else.
Yes. And again, I just thinking back onto that, just how it expands. When people come out of the prisons, and they're heathen, where are they going to go? They're going to be, would it be better for them to know the communities that they're going into and how to fit into those communities and how to become, productive members of those communities? Or are they going to come in with a prison mindset and like destroy the, and most of them really just want to get out and want to experience a life that is productive and positive and gives them purpose. And I agree with you. Many of the reasons that they're in there are not really reasons that, we're not talking murder and rape. And I will tell you that a lot of those people I generally would not want to deal with. I actually didn't want to know what their crimes were, because that might actually influence how I would deal with them. But most people who are in for drug possession, whatever, I mean, like, seriously. And it is difficult because there is a completely different mindset there from a lot when you go in there, and a lot of those men and women, because there's an increasing number of women I see coming in the InReach mail who are corresponding with us. They don't know where to go. They're trying to seek answers, and they don't know where to start. And we have an uphill battle ourselves with fighting Heathenry's reputation with the corrections officers, with the prison administrators, with the chaplains. InReach has made a big dent in that, because I had to fight with New Jersey prisons over the ability for inmates to have access to the rooms. Because they said, well, the corrections officers can't read notes if they're written in rooms. I said, okay, so all your corrections officers, can they read Arabic and Hebrew? Because I see you having the instruction in those languages up there. So, but we have to fight the bigotry from the one end sometimes. It's gotten a lot better in the last 10 years, though. And we also have to just try to present the good information we have. But for some reason, the racist lord seems to pass very easily from prisoner to prisoner to prisoner in there. And there's a lot that we have to combat. And we could always use more hands, especially with going in and talking directly to the inmates.
And I think that's very important. It's also, it's, as I work on one of the other programs that we have that Rob was also instrumental in helping us get started, is Heathens in Recovery, which is a program that helps heathens that struggle with addiction and mental health issues. And that's another avenue that I really am hoping one day we'll be able to work within Reach to provide those resources, because the other option is often only Christian based 12-step programs.
Yes, and I've actually heard that directly from inmates, like where they say they go to these things, but they're like, "But I'm not powerless. If by saying I'm powerless, like I'm a heathen. I need to be better than powerless. Like I have some power within me. I may not be able to do it all by myself, but I am not powerless. And so you know what? You can still be. But I understand what they're saying, and the context does matter for some of them. Others, they're able to like kind of synthesize the two, but that's up to each individual heathen's mindset and practice and belief.
And it's also up to, I will say every 12-step group is autonomous, and some are very Christian and some aren't.
Yeah.
It just really depends on, here in Arkansas, it's all Jesus all the time. So, and that's just the culture here. It's not, it is what it is. But I do think that it is so important, because that's it's really become a breeding ground, and now it's starting to spill over. And I know from my work, I used to be public relations director before I got on the Read, and we're watching kind of the radicalization of people in the military, heathens who are in the police forces, and really there's a lot of directed radicalization by hate groups. And so we can't just turn a blind eye and say, oh, well, we can't do anything about that. We also work with the military as well. And we work with I don't know that we necessarily have a law enforcement outreach, but I know for a fact we have military outreach, and we have a wonderful military steward who does a lot of good work.
Yeah, and it's funny you should mention the law enforcement aspect, because being a manager of Heathens Against Hate, I also see a lot of the reluctance among many heathens to interact with law enforcement because of the bad apples in law enforcement who cause problems and engage in racist and unthinkable actions against people simply based on their skin color. But and one could argue about good cop, bad cop. There's a lot of people believe all cops are bad. I'm not sure anything is always quite that simple, but there are heathen police officers out there, and and they have potential for being agents of change within within those institutions, and that's not an easy task. I actually think it's actually probably easier to change some things within the prisons than it is within the law enforcement. But that's all speculation at this point.
Well, and even locally, I think that we as heathens can do things. I applied to be a clergy advisor to our police department because they had no pagan. They only had Christian ministers. They didn't have a rabbi. They didn't have an imam. And so I applied, and I haven't heard anything yet. It's an application process, but I'm hoping to have that opportunity to be that voice, because pagans in general, I know a lot, especially if you've been a heathen or a pagan more than about 10 years, I think every one of us has like a bad interaction with law enforcement during a heathen or a pagan story. And so I'm hoping to change that. And I don't know if Witchvox, which is a site that has RIP Witchvox, that's how I found my first heathens. But Witchvox used to have this really great resource packet, and that's definitely something I'd love to see us working on for police, about paganism and about heathenry and what we are, and we're not devil worshippers. Of course, that used to be the thing you had to fight back then, but yeah. I think that can often be an uphill battle for us as heathens and pagans.
Yeah, and some of us have also had good experience with law enforcement. Like I remember when the my first real experience as a heathen with law enforcement was actually when the our Westboro Baptist Church knockoff here in Philadelphia first protested Philadelphia Pagan Pride, which the police were just like rolling their eyes at they were trying not to be seen, but you could see them rolling their eyes at this stuff. And it's some policemen can they really do try their best, others not so much. And but there is a broken system behind there, and I would like to see heathens who are in law enforcement be agents of change to try to bring some like true actually enforce law, not enforce the things that just keep people in this conveyor belt back to prison.
Well, and
And
I think it's an uphill battle for a lot of them, because if you Google heathen or Ossetru and law enforcement or police, you're going to get the stories about the the racist cops on the East Coast who all lost their jobs for being, finding out they're members of racist groups.
yeah,
So there is kind of that uphill battle. So, and that kind of does bring me to this, because you've been heathen now for 15 years.
yeah.
Have you ever run into a situation where you have faced discrimination because you were a heathen?
Yeah, let's think about this. I've come across. Oh yeah, actually, I don't know if it was specifically because I was a heathen, or if it was because I was Pennsylvania Dutch. It's because the good grief, the cat's like meowing around.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You're being discriminated against by the cat, clearly.
but people have a tendency to confuse Pennsylvania Dutch, which we are of German descent, but with German. And when I was student teaching, I actually was discriminated against by the cooperating teacher, because finally it came out one day while we were. I couldn't understand why she was riding me so hard, like why she seemed to really be not so very nice to me. And finally one day I discovered an error in the textbook where they were talking about the origin of the phrase Pennsylvania Dutch, which it really doesn't have as much to do with Deutsch. It has nothing to do with, like, we don't call ourselves Deutsch, we call ourselves Deutsch, but actually has more to do with the English word Dutch changing meaning over centuries. It used to have a much broader term, but they were referring to it being a corruption of Deutsch. That's not at all how it really happened. And so I asked her how would you go about getting a correction made to a textbook, and she gave me the answer. And she said, I've been meaning to ask you. And I was like, uh-oh. Just how much like German is Pennsylvania German? And I went to her, explained, like, we're separated by like 300 years. Our ancestors left before Germany was even a united country. And as she's going along, she says, oh, so no Hitler then. And I was like, well, if you mean like my uncle going over and helping blow up bridges against Hitler, well, yeah, they're. Oh, so like you people are Nazis? Like, no, and then it started really hitting me. She didn't understand our culture at all. She didn't understand our placement in history or the role that we play, and so that ended up becoming a teaching moment, because she was of Jewish descent, but she grew up in Germantown, which is where the Pennsylvania culture got first established. But what she didn't know about me was that I happened to work for 10 years in a refugee resettlement agency in New York City, and one that was run by Jewish organizations. And so I began to let her know more about like my background, and she like it's suddenly I went from being like like this the German plague, to being like, oh, he's the best student teacher ever, and like, but it's not the first time. You get discriminated against when you're a kid for having the accent, and they try to reduce your accent. And they did a lot of things that with us that they probably shouldn't have done back then, but they might have been right. Maybe had I maintained my accent fully, it might have worked against me, because people would have kept that stereotypical dumb Dutch thing going. And so, but specifically because I was heathen, not so much that I can think of offhand. If it was there, yeah, I have the same thing that you do too. The same thing all inclusive heathens always have to do. We see the hammer on somebody, and then we have to figure out whether or not we want to approach that person, because is that person going, like, do they have any tattoos that might imply that they're gonna that they're racist? Like, look for other things, which is unfortunate, because I don't know if every other religious identity in the world has to do that, but we certainly do. That's probably the closest that I can think of offhand. And of course, the Christian protesters about anything. That's a
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's yeah.
The goat story is great. That's.
I wish I had been at that one. Was that in Indiana?
That was before my time. That was before I got in the Troth in 2004. 93, 4-ish. So that was before me.
Hey,
Um,
last year, my neighbors called the police because in Stanning, which is the last observance that just ended here for Orglov, on the last night of it is our Lichterfest, our night of lights, and we're lighting off green and white smoke bombs and like burning like a bonfire that got a little bit larger than I was expecting. My neighbors thought my house was on fire, and so they called the fire company came and showed up here and everything like that, and they're like, you probably want to like keep this a little smaller and keep it out of here. I was like, I gotta tell you, the green and white haze by itself is just amazing. But
yeah, it was at Lincoln State Park in Indiana.
Indiana, okay. Ben's told that story before, and I think it's hilarious.
Yeah, it's definitely there have been some experiences. I know here in Arkansas we have run into a lot of the pagan like campgrounds we have here are in very small towns, and that leads to some very weird experiences with police. But it's gotten better, But I think that it's interesting. So we got about 15 minutes left. So I want to ask you some kind of big picture questions.
Okay.
As you have served what 2 terms and then like a 2/3 of a term as steer?
No, as steer, it's been 1 full term from 2016 to 2019. I was associate steer from 2013 to 2016, and then the two,
one and 2/3.
Yes.
As steer. So my question is, 5-year vision of heathenry in general. What do you think? What would you like to see, not just, Orglov, but the big picture for the Troth, for heathenry in 5 years?
For the Troth, I think the Troth needs to continue on its pattern of becoming like a resource for all branches of heathenry to interact with one another and to provide information and to become like a think tank in some ways of heathen lore, literature. Look, our productions, they're kick-ass, and kudos to Ben and Diana and Lori and everybody on that team for all the work that they've done over the decades. It really is critical. But the Troth used to be viewed as many kind of like as for some people was functioning like their kindred, because they're online kindred, because there weren't enough heathens near them to actually have a community. But that's changed since 2000, in the last 10 years. So there's heathens in more places. So the Troth's role began to change from being that of like a online club or for heathens or whatever, to becoming this advocacy group, or this group that actually took a stance on things and began to produce literature that advanced the causes of inclusion within heathenry, because that's our biggest albatross around our necks, is this history with racists from the foundation forward. And are you gonna say something?
I was gonna say, I would even argue that at this point we've moved beyond inclusion to active anti-racist.
Yes, we have moved to active anti-racist, anti-homophobia, anti-transphobia, anti-ableism, all that stuff.
Anti-bigotry.
Anti-bigotry, and of those, by the way, when you know this well, you know us probably better than anybody here, Lauren, is that one of the most difficult ones is ableism, because it's very difficult and expensive to build a website that can be accessible and to make the accommodations for people who need them. We're trying our best, but like it's
now our current upgrade it's passed the accessibility testing.
Okay, good.
So, I sent you the scores. I sent you the scores when I tested it, and we actually passed all the criteria. But we're working to make improvements. If any of you happen to be a Drupal 9 developer, hit me up, please, because that's where we're struggling right now, is finding a Drupal 9 dev to do our stuff. And that's my background. Before I became a computer programmer, I worked in accessibility at a university, and I'm also visually impaired, and it is very hard. And as the person who is in charge of Troth this year, trying to make sure that our facilities are as accessible as possible is hard.
And to keep with conflicting accessibility issues.
Yes.
because that happens too. As you know, Lauren, I'm a special ed teacher, and much of my daily living is also around meeting the needs of a population that can't always speak for itself, and so this is where we tend to work pretty well together, is identifying these things. But again, the depth and the breadth of accessibility and accommodation needs is not always so easily seen. That was probably one of the toughest ones for us to make sure that we're adhering to, but we are working on that stuff. And I want everybody to be clear here. Much of the absolute credit goes to Lauren for actually executing this stuff. So,
and I also want to say we have a great team. It's not just me. It's our webmaster. It is a lot of people. It's not just me. But I do want to say on that, when it comes to accessibility, I think, and to me on that topic, how do we as the Troth, one of the biggest things I've heard in the accessibility realm and discussion, how do you think the Troth, because you have this background as a special ed teacher, how do we address heathenry being quote unquote the religion with homework, but not everyone has the ability or the resources time-wise to put in this level of reading that you and I had to do when we became heathens 15, 20 years ago?
And some of this is actually, we've seen sort of in a way, I think our clergy program actually kind of has led the charge of some of this, is because they began to recognize that not everybody had the scholarly background to complete the lore program, but they were still doing the work on the ground to make the communities move forward and advance. And so being able to give people another way to achieve the clergy recognition was important, because I could sit down, like the lore program was all basically Norse centric. I went through the lore program, but like writing yet another thing about Odin just didn't appeal to me, because I already wrote volumes and volumes and volumes about Vudan from our own perspective, and so the accommodations being made to recognize the people for what they're already doing does matter. Now, what I would like to see, and I'm currently back to studying ASL, but I would like to see more of that sort of inclusion. And I know that's a pet area for you too. And give more people who are in those positions or in those conditions, or who work in those fields, or who are visually impaired or deaf or whatever, to kind of build some of the roles themselves, and to help identify what their needs are, because you're visually impaired, I'm somewhat hearing impaired, but neither one of us is fully in the thick of what the issues are for them and the challenges are for them. And I think it's best if they represent themselves and tell us what they want and maybe take on lead.
But even beyond that, we have people who their learning style just doesn't meet with reading. Yeah. And so one of the things I will say that the Troth is doing is we are branching into audiobooks. We launched our first one, the Waylon the Smith, and we're working towards other ones. It's a big undertaking, and they finally found someone who wasn't me to lead it, so I was excited.
Well, this is like this thing too. Like, yeah. Our YouTube channel's been sitting around forever without much activity on it. Now it has some real activity people might want to listen to. It can be listened to in the vehicle because they don't need to see what we're doing.
Yeah.
Podcasts, things like that. They can make information presentable in different ways. It wouldn't hurt if we could actually have more different media. Like, some people like to read, some people like to listen to things, some people like to act things out.
Yes.
Whatever ways we can make things appeal to people. But the thing is that there's only 24 hours in the day for you, and there's only 24 hours in the day for me. We need the people who have the skills in those areas to step up and present ideas, or to present the ways for it to happen, or to make it happen. Kind of like our Heathen Sunday school teacher did. Just kind of stood up and just led it, and now it's a program.
Right. And now we are the one thing the Troth is doing right now is we are creating and soon to be launching a children's Sunday school, Heathen Sunday school, that will be for ages, I can't remember exactly what the lower limit age is, all the way up through high school. And that's really exciting, because that is yet another avenue that we have for education, and also to give, and as much as there are heathens everywhere, there's still a lot of isolated people or a kindred that may not have that many kids, and here gives kids a chance to connect with people their own age,
And you
which
never
can
know,
be
sooner
really
or later
hard.
they may be meeting each other and dating each other. You never, I mean, like, it could be the beginnings of relationships and a community involvement with each other across the miles. And you never know. That's not unlike how many Amish and Mennonite communities work. But
Yeah.
and the other thing that I was going to say, in answer to your other question, is the international scene. The I see the Troth playing a pivotal role in the international relations. Amanda Lee Hawkins, and she's been pivotal in that role, and the Frith Forge, the Frith Forge, and getting more involved in those kinds of international conferences and discussions where we share a lot of our resources and understandings. That's going to be extremely important as we go forward, because no matter how one thing that among heathens and pagans, like heathenry, we all share a lot of the same beliefs. Paganism and heathenry, we may not share the same beliefs, but we all have a lot of the same challenges. And learning from each other about how to circumvent that, networking, so that when we're there for each other when we need them, we need each other, or whatever. That I can see the Troth playing a pivotal role also in going forward in the future.
So thank you so much for being with us, Rob. And just to kind of toss that out here, uh, you know, we are definitely moving forward, although we will be having a face-to-face Troth meet this year. We are going to start having I knock on wood, because we are going to start having a winter Troth meet that will be virtual. So I think that that's going to be a very cool thing that's going to happen, so that we can kind of reach everybody. We do have one quick question from our public relations director, Ben, as I call him, because Ben is my Ben. Do you guys think that this religion of homework leads people to constantly try to reinvent the wheel? When we engage with old texts and not with each other, do we do ourselves a disservice? Yes. I mean, yeah.
And I might have a different perspective on that, because you see, the religion of homework, when we engage with old texts, not with each other. Orglova is not all about the old text. Orglova is about the living tradition. And so it depends on, and Asatru is developing a living tradition. After a decade or two, people have new practices or the way they do things, and so they're engaging in that. It's when you start lording the old text over the people who are doing their own thing or whatever. That's when we really have ourselves a disservice. I think, yeah. Well, what are the two most common phrases in heathenry?
You're not the boss of me, and you're doing it wrong. Wagner's rules of heathen interaction.
Rules of heathen interaction. Ben seems to be playing a major role tonight.
And that's been because I know, like, I have gotten big on TikTok, and I've gotten into some stuff with some people who quote unquote are historical heathens about that are kind of come across as kind of anti-trans, anti-LGBT, and I'm like, first of all, your history's bad. Second of all, I'm just gonna beat you senseless with my knowledge. It's gonna and none of that stuff applies right now.
And really, do you think that our heathen, like pre-Christian heathen forebears, that they live in a time capsule that never changed? Did they not adopt new technologies as they found them? Did they not get influenced by the people they were interacting with? Like, would they continue to do the same thing that didn't work just because it was tradition? They were smarter than that. And
heathenry is very wibbly wobbly, is like how I like to put it.
Kind of like the Weebles.
Yes. So I definitely think that's important. Well, Rob, thank you for being with us tonight. I'm going to make a couple of announcements. If you are watching this before Sunday, and I don't know what the day is on Sunday. 20th. The 20th. This Sunday, the 20th at 2 p.m. Eastern is our Troth February member moot. And that is a great time to get together. We get on, we hang out, we talk, and in general, just have a lot of fun together. And beyond that, don't forget that there is the monthly lore chat that is hosted by the New York City Heathens that comes up, I believe it's the second Monday of the month. And also Troth Moot is going to be in Memphis, baby. my stomping grounds, and we're going to be having that 24th to the 26th of June. Tickets should be coming up pretty soon. I need to have a Troth Moot organizer meeting with Tanya and discuss. We got to finalize the ticket prices.
I have a plug too. For those of you in Eastern Pennsylvania, New Jersey, or Delaware, we have our monthly Heathen pub moot in Bucks County at the Newportville Inn. It's the third Thursday of every month, which would be tomorrow. We're kind of in a hybrid state right now where some of us feel comfortable going and some of us don't. And so they'll video in. But we want to keep that alive. So if you have any questions, contact me. If you don't know how to contact me, I'm sure that we can make sure that you find out how to contact me. But on Facebook, I'm Robert L. Schreiwer, as my name has appeared right there.
Or you could email steer@thetroth.org.
And
and if you look in the description, I listed Rob's group and as well as some other websites on the stuff that Rob works on.
She's on it. She knows what she's doing.
I'm also the producer for a different YouTube channel, so I at least know how that works. So once again, guys, thank you so much. And in the grand tradition of Arkansas Heathens, wassail, y'all.
Take care, everybody. Thanks again, Laura.